They looked at your kindness and made the wrong decision. They saw your open heart, your calm tone, the way you stayed present, and they thought that meant you could be handled. They thought your patience was weakness. They thought your loyalty meant you would wait forever. They thought your silence would always break first, but they did not understand what they were really standing in front of. They were not looking at someone fragile. They were looking at someone deep, someone steady, someone who knew how to love without turning cold, and who could also leave without making noise when respect disappeared. That is what they missed, and that is why the whole story changed. Because the person they assumed would always reach back, always explain, always hold the connection together, slowly stopped doing it. Not to punish, not to play games, but to protect peace. Listen closely, because this matters. Some people only recognize your value when your energy is no longer easy to touch. Some people only feel your strength when your warmth is no longer freely available. And when that moment comes, the balance shifts in silence. No warning, no speech, just a new reality they can feel but cannot control. That is where this begins. Not with revenge, with awakening, not with anger, with clarity. And once clarity enters, everything they thought they knew about you starts to fall apart. At the start, they did not plan this like a villain in a movie. It usually does not work like that. What drove them was something more hidden, more automatic. They wanted control because control felt safe. Distance felt safe. Keeping one foot out of the connection felt safe. If they could pull back and watch you lean in, they felt calm. If they could delay a reply and still feel your attention waiting for them, they felt secure. If they could disappear for a while and come back without consequence, they felt powerful. That is why your kindness looked useful to them. You were understanding. You did not explode over every inconsistency. You tried to see the good in them even when their behavior was confusing. You gave space, you gave patience, you gave them the benefit of the doubt, and every time you responded with grace, they quietly collected information. They noticed how much you cared. They noticed how much effort you were willing to give. They noticed you were trying to understand their wounds instead of judging them for them. But here is what they misunderstood. You were not gentle because you were desperate. You were gentle because you were aware. You were not staying because you had no options. You were staying because you believed depth deserved a real chance. That difference is everything. Stay with me, because this is where people get it wrong. Kindness is not surrender. Patience is not permission. And empathy does not mean you will accept confusion forever. You saw things they barely admitted to themselves. You noticed how closeness made them uncomfortable. You saw how they changed the subject when feelings came too close. You noticed how praise made them laugh it off, how real vulnerability made them pull away, how warm moments were often followed by distance. And because you were perceptive, you responded with softness instead of pressure. You thought maybe safety would help. Maybe consistency would calm what fear had built inside them. Maybe, if you stayed steady, they would finally believe they did not have to run, so you gave reassurance. You lowered your voice when tension rose. You met silence with patience. You tried to meet them halfway even when they barely took a step. That was not weakness. That was emotional intelligence. But emotional intelligence without limits becomes self-betrayal, and eventually your spirit began to feel the cost. Because understanding someone's pain does not mean you must become a place where that pain keeps landing unchecked. This is the part many people need to hear. You can see someone clearly and still decide they do not get unlimited access to you. You can care deeply and still step back. You can love someone honestly and still say, "This no longer feels healthy for me." That is not cruelty, that is maturity. And the moment you started feeling that truth in your body, the old pattern began to lose its power, not all at once, slowly, quietly, but once you see a pattern for what it is, it becomes very hard to keep calling it love. For a while, the dynamic gave them the illusion of the upper hand. When they went cold, you checked in. When they dropped breadcrumbs, you tried to make meaning out of them. When they gave mixed signals, you searched for clarity instead of walking away. That fed the pattern. It made them believe they could stay half in and still keep your full attention. They did not have to define the connection because you were still there. They did not have to choose clearly because your hope was doing some of the work for them. And hot and cold behavior survives on exactly that kind of emotional labor. It survives when one person keeps translating confusion into possibility, but patterns only feel strong until the other person wakes up, and one day, somewhere between another delayed reply and another moment of carrying the emotional weight alone, something inside you got tired in a very honest way, not dramatic, not loud, just honest. You started noticing how much energy went into reading their mood, decoding their silence, replaying conversations, and shrinking your own needs just to keep the connection from breaking. You realized that love should not feel like constantly adapting to uncertainty. You realized that asking for clarity is not asking for too much. You realized that if someone needs endless room to doubt you while expecting endless access to you, the structure itself is broken. This is where the shift begins, for real, not when they change. When you stop participating in what drains you, and once that happens, even your silence starts to say something new. You did not become harsh, you became regulated. You stopped writing long messages to explain simple truths to someone committed to staying unclear. You stopped offering full paragraphs to one-line replies. You stopped chasing emotional closeness from someone who kept backing away from it. You matched energy, not as punishment, but as protection. That one change confused them more than any argument ever could, because the version of you they thought they understood suddenly became unreadable. Before they could predict your effort, they could count on your warmth returning after every distance. They could assume your care would remain available no matter how inconsistent they became. But now the old map no longer worked. You were not reacting the same way. You were not pushing for answers. You were not collapsing into overthinking every time they pulled back. You were steady, calm, harder to reach, not because you were hiding, but because you were no longer overexposing your heart to someone who handled it carelessly, and that loss of predictability unsettled them. People who depend on control feel unstable when control fades. Suddenly, they started checking for your attention instead of assuming it. They started noticing the space where your effort used to be. They started feeling the absence of what they once treated as guaranteed. This is important, so do not miss it. You did not create their discomfort. You simply stopped carrying it for them. You stopped buffering the emotional tension. You stopped rushing in to repair what you did not break alone. And when you stop absorbing the imbalance, it returns to its source. That is when the internal shift became visible, even if no one else could see it from the outside. You began pouring your energy back into your own life. Your mornings felt cleaner, your thoughts became less crowded, your routines started to matter again. You invested in your sleep, your work, your body, your peace. You laughed without waiting for their message to make the day feel complete. You stopped measuring your worth by their consistency. You stopped treating their confusion like a puzzle you had to solve. And with every quiet act of self-return, you became stronger, not louder, stronger. There is a kind of power that does not need to announce itself. It just stops begging. It stops explaining. It stops negotiating with what keeps hurting it. That was the power rising in you, and whether they admitted it or not, they could feel it. They felt that your presence was no longer guaranteed. They felt that access now required something unfamiliar to them. Effort, clarity, reciprocity. That is what changed their view of you, not drama, dignity. Dignity has weight, it lingers, it reshapes how people understand you. They once thought you were emotionally dependent, but now they were forced to see something else. You were capable of attachment, yes, but you were also capable of detachment when respect vanished. You were not weak for caring. You were powerful enough to stop offering care where it was not being valued. That is rare, and rare things are often misunderstood until they are gone. Keep listening, because this is where the emotional mirror turns around. When your silence became intentional, it landed differently than theirs ever did. Their silence had often been a shield, a tactic, a way to pull back and feel safe again. Your silence was different. Yours was composed, grounded, clean. You were not waiting for the perfect moment to reach out. You were not staging a reaction. You were not trying to make them jealous, anxious, or guilty. You were settling back into yourself. You were calming your nervous system. You were stepping out of the state of constant emotional stretching that had kept you available to inconsistency for too long. And because they were used to using distance one way, they assumed your distance meant the same thing. They thought you would break first. They thought your quiet was temporary. They thought eventually you would circle back, send a soft check-in, leave a small emotional opening, and restore the pattern. But you did not. You stayed grounded. No hidden signals, no dramatic exit, no half-open door designed to keep the game alive, just a steady withdrawal of energy from what no longer felt mutual. That kind of silence is deeply unsettling to someone who survives through control. It gives them nothing to fight, nothing to label, nothing to dismiss. Your composure removed the story they might have told themselves about you being too emotional or too needy. Now they had to face something harder. Maybe you were not unstable. Maybe you were done. Maybe you had simply seen enough. And when someone realizes the person they counted on is fully able to live without their inconsistency, something cracks inside their old assumptions. They may not have shown it loudly, but internally a disruption started forming. You were supposed to chase, you were supposed to wonder, you were supposed to seek clarity from them. Instead, there you were, moving forward with a calm they did not expect. And that calm forced reflection. Questions began to rise. Did I misread them? Did I push too far? Did I assume too much? Was there patient strength all along? This is where the psychological reversal becomes real. The uncertainty that once lived in your chest starts showing up in theirs. The same curiosity that once had you checking your phone begins nudging them toward their own screen. The same discomfort you used to carry after mixed signals begins circling inside their private thoughts. Not because you engineered it, because you stopped intercepting it. Energy has a way of returning to where it came from when it is no longer being absorbed by the more loving person, and that return can feel strangely humbling. They begin to notice your absence in ordinary moments. They wonder if someone else now receives the warmth they once treated casually. They replay your last conversations differently. They remember your steadiness. They remember how safe your presence felt, and only now do they sense what they were standing in front of. Sometimes this is where they reappear. A small message, a casual reaction, a soft return that acts like nothing ever happened. But beneath that light tone is a deeper question they may never say out loud. Are you still reachable? Is the door still open? Do I still have a place here? If that moment comes, this is where your growth matters most. Their return is not automatic proof of change. Sometimes people return because they miss connection. Sometimes they return because they miss access. Sometimes it is reflection. Sometimes it is ego. Sometimes it is fear of losing a familiar source of warmth. And this is why your new clarity matters more than their new attention. Before, you may have rushed toward any signal that looked like hope. Now you pause, you observe, you watch what happens over time. Real effort looks steady, real care becomes consistent, real accountability does not arrive in vague messages and disappear when emotional honesty is required, and your deeper wisdom can now feel the difference. That is one of the biggest changes in you. You are no longer reading every small move as destiny. You are no longer turning brief intensity into imagined depth. You are no longer calling potential a relationship. You have learned that fear-based pursuit feels urgent, but grounded love feels clear. One creates confusion, the other creates peace, and peace has become too valuable to trade away for temporary attention. This does not mean your heart is closed. It means your heart is protected by awareness. It means that if someone wants to step back into your life, they now meet a version of you that listens carefully, watches patterns, and no longer ignores what your body already knows. That is not hardness, that is discernment, and discernment is what turns pain into wisdom instead of repetition. There is also something deeply important happening inside them during this stage, even if they never name it. Your absence may reveal feelings they had minimized for a long time. People who rely on distance often believe they are less attached than they truly are. They pride themselves on independence. They tell themselves they can leave without being touched. But attachment does not disappear just because it is denied. It waits under the surface until access is threatened. And when your energy is no longer constantly there, what they once minimized becomes harder to ignore. They may feel a quiet anxiety they do not know how to explain. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle unease. A new awareness that something they assumed would always remain available is no longer certain. That feeling can stir respect, it can stir regret, it can also stir resistance, because stepping closer would require vulnerability, and vulnerability is what they have spent so long avoiding. So they hover, they test gently, they send small signs instead of clear intentions, they watch your tone, they study your replies, they try to determine whether your distance is permanent or temporary. But here is the deeper truth you must hold on to. Not everyone who begins to respect your strength will rise to meet it. Some people admire maturity from a distance because entering it demands growth they are not ready for, and if that is the case, it is not a statement about your value, it is a statement about their capacity. Your worth does not shrink because someone lacks the courage to meet it fully. This is why your groundedness matters now more than ever, because when someone who once stayed distant starts leaning a little closer, old hope can wake up fast. A familiar longing can return. Part of you may still want the story to end differently. That is human. There is nothing shameful in that. But now you have something stronger than hope alone. You have evidence. You have awareness. You have the memory of what it cost to stay too long in confusion. So now you know what to look for. Genuine effort has structure. It has consistency. It has accountability. It does not make you guess every week. It does not hide behind fear forever while expecting your endless understanding. It moves. It communicates. It meets you halfway without being pushed there. Reactive pursuit feels different. It is sudden, intense, often charming, but it fades when steadiness is required. This is why you no longer have to overanalyze. Your body knows the difference now. Your peace knows the difference now. And that inner knowing is one of the most valuable things you gained from this entire experience. You stopped abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You stopped shrinking your needs to maintain a fragile connection. You stopped thinking love meant endless availability. That is the true turning point. Not whether they come back, not whether they finally understand. The turning point is that you understand. And once you truly understand your own value, your standards stop feeling like walls. They start feeling like alignment. What happened was never just about one person misjudging you. It was about you remembering yourself. You remembered that being easy to love does not mean being easy to control. You remembered that softness can have edges. You remembered that emotional openness is not the same thing as emotional access without responsibility. This is why the whole atmosphere changed. Before, they were studying your reactions to measure control. Now they may be studying their own reactions to your absence. Before, you carried most of the uncertainty. Now uncertainty echoes back toward the place it began. That is the mirror effect, and mirrors are hard to face. They force people to see how much of the dynamic depended on your willingness to overgive. They reveal how much comfort they found in your predictability. They reveal what was taken for granted. But even this is not the final point. The final point is not their discomfort. It is your transformation. It is the quiet strength that formed when you chose balance over chaos. It is the calm that came when you stopped proving your worth and simply started living from it. That calm changes the way you speak. It changes what you answer. It changes what you tolerate. It changes how you love. Now your warmth is still real, but it is wiser. Your heart is still open, but it is no longer unlocked for people who arrive with confusion and call it connection. That is growth, real growth, the kind that does not need applause because it can be felt in your everyday life. And if they do return in a deeper way, if they try to step forward with more honesty than before, you are now in a different position entirely. You can listen without melting. You can care without collapsing. You can stay open without handing over your center. That is the difference between old you and evolved you. You no longer confuse being compassionate with being endlessly available. You no longer think your role is to rescue every wounded person who enters your space. You understand that love without mutual effort becomes emotional exhaustion. You understand that someone protecting themselves communicates differently than someone playing with your emotions. Protection speaks honestly about fear. Games create confusion and call it complexity. Protection respects your limits. Games keep testing them. And because you have lived through both, your instincts are sharper now. This part matters, so hear it clearly. You do not need to become cold to become safe. You do not need to become distant to become wise. You do not need to shut down your heart to stop being misread. You simply need to stay aligned. Aligned with what feels true. Aligned with what feels mutual, aligned with the version of yourself that no longer begs for what should be freely given by the right connection. That alignment is powerful because it is quiet. It does not chase. It does not perform. It does not scream for recognition. It just stands. And anyone standing in front of that kind of energy will eventually realize they misjudged it. So if you ever look back and wonder whether you were too much, too open, too patient, let that question end here. You were not too much. You were sincere in a world that often rewards distance. You were steady in a space that normalized confusion. You were generous with your heart, and someone mistook that generosity for compliance. That was their error, not your identity. You were never easy to play. You were simply genuine. And genuine people are often underestimated by those who do not understand depth. But depth has a threshold, and once that threshold is crossed, the same person who loved with extraordinary patience can leave with extraordinary grace. That is what they did not expect. They expected endless access. They did not expect discernment. They expected your care to survive any level of inconsistency. They did not expect your standards to rise. They expected the old version of the story to keep repeating. They did not expect you to wake up, but you did. And from that moment on, everything changed. Maybe they will reflect. Maybe they will return. Maybe they will retreat further into themselves. That part is not yours to control. What is yours is this: your peace, your clarity, your self-respect, your ability to love without losing your center. That is the real victory. Quiet, clean, unshakable. And once you carry that kind of truth, no one gets to confuse your kindness for weakness ever again.